Today is the 100th episode of Undivided, and I wanted to have a guest on who kind of epitomizes some of what we're working toward. And, because I think it's easy to kind of just talk about frustrations about the political system. It's much harder to actually put the work in to try to fix it. And I think our next guest is trying to do just that. Andrew Yang, I've talked about his book on the show before, Forward Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. It's an interesting read if you haven't read it already. But he was obviously a 2016 presidential contender, went on to run for the mayor of New York City. And now he has started something called the Forward Party, which is really a party and a movement that's built around the idea that we have to work together. We have to build consensus. We have to compromise. We really have to break free from this two-party system that just leads to gridlock and bickering and divisiveness. So Andrew Yang and I had an opportunity to talk about the Forward Party and where he hopes to take the movement from here. Andrew Yang, welcome to Undivided.
It's great to be here, Brandi. Thanks for having me.
What's life like for you these days?
I just got back from Utah where I was campaigning for Evan McMullin for U.S. Senate. And the Forward Party has endorsed another couple dozen candidates everywhere from local up to congressional and Senate. So we're getting out, hopefully, hundreds, maybe even thousands of volunteers to try and push some great candidates over the finish line.
Yeah, Evan McMullin is interesting. He came out and said he wouldn't caucus with Republicans or Democrats. I was sort of like, well, how would that work? Because he wouldn't get any committee assignments or anything, right?
Well, you're actually guaranteeing one committee assignment through Senate rules. So someone's going to have him on. And we've seen that it can be someone in the middle who's an independent who can actually sway and impact and sometimes determine policy. You've seen that with Joe Manchin on the Democratic side. And I think there's a chance Evan ends up the Joe Manchin equivalent on the other side.
Who are some other candidates for the November election that Forward Party has endorsed?
Well, we've endorsed two other Senate candidates, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, who famously voted to impeach Donald Trump and is living to tell about it. So go, Lisa. And Mark Kelly, who's running against Blake Masters in Arizona. Excited about both Lisa and Mark. And then there are like another couple dozen candidates from congressional down that I don't want to try and list because I'm going to leave someone out.
What's the test for you guys? How does someone earn the endorsement of the Forward Party? What are you looking for?
Well, a lot of it is driven by our state leads and our activists and volunteers in each state because they get excited about a particular candidate. They bring them to us. Sometimes the candidates or campaigns reach out to us as well. And then we have a political committee that comes together. The vast majority of the candidates we're backing are running against someone you'd consider an extremist, probably someone who either Trump has endorsed or has been aligned with very closely. So that's not a requisite, but that seems to be a very consistent pattern.
Yeah. Obviously, I want to talk about Forward Party and sort of where you guys are at and how you're trying to grow. I had to ask you, I watched the Jim Acosta interview a couple months ago. What the hell was that about?
And don't you have to take a position on something? Don't you have to take a position on something? You can't just say, well, this is a hot button issue, so I'm not going to take a position on it. If you want to run the country, you're going to have to make some hard decisions, Andrew.
Do you guys have some history? What was the deal with that?
Yeah, I was surprised by the level of antagonism as well. I mean, heck, I'm on CNN occasionally, and most of the time it's not quite that hostile or overbearing. But I think Jim has taken on a particular persona in order to, frankly, get ratings and have an identity. And I think antagonizing me is part of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm all for hard questions and making you kind of justify and explain your decisions, but it just seemed like, yeah, like you said, I think hostile was a very good word for it. I saw some people coming to your defense over it. But, one of the points I think that was valid that he was making is sort of, do you have to take more concrete platform positions on issues? So before we get to that, I guess, what is the platform of the Forward Party?
The platform of the Forward Party revolves around three pillars: free people, thriving communities, and a vibrant democracy. And so if you're helping accomplish one of those goals, then we're going to be excited. But we want to be able to help people in both Massachusetts and Mississippi, which means trying to provide genuine choice. And so if you wind up trying to line up on this left-right spectrum, we don't think that's where most Americans are. And we think the real problem isn't left or right. It's those of us on the outside looking in And unfortunately, that describes the vast majority of Americans at this point. That's what Forward is designed to change.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why we wanted to have you on so bad. It's like, we call it political commentary for the anti-fringe. And so I think there's a huge voice of Americans who are just exhausted. But for you, not only were you a Democrat and ran as a Democrat, but, you had policy prescriptions that certainly wouldn't be considered moderate, like a universal basic income, for example. So do you have to achieve what the Forward Party is trying to achieve, do you have to put some of your personal desires and stances aside?
Well, that's so perceptive of you, Brandi. The fact is, right now, the top priority for thinking Americans is trying to make our system work, trying to create an actual functioning government that's representative and reflects popular will. And if we have that, then we can have coherent conversations about what kind of policies you want to advance. But until then, most of it's just being used, frankly, to pit us against each other. So when you ask me, hey, Andrew, are you checking your own policy preferences at the door? I think at this point, our policy preferences are just being used to tribalize and inflame. And the main thing I'm about is making it so that there's a genuine connection between what we want and what our representatives do.
Yeah, and I totally can appreciate that. I do think there's a question about, at some point, do you feel like you need to say, here's where we believe the consensus of most Americans is at on issues like abortion, gun control, policing?
Yeah, I think that's the way it's going to play out in real life. We are having our first ever national convention next summer, and there are going to be thousands of people from around the country. And if everyone coalesces around a particular point of view, then I think that's where the party will land. But I think that should be people driven and not elite driven, honestly. You know what I mean? Like it should be that all of the people that have come together to form the Forward Party in states around the country actually tell us what they believe.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Lisa Murkowski, Evan McMullin, Mark Kelly. I mean, those are people who have disagreements, politically speaking, who don't agree on policy. So when, if you open up the Forward Party to people across the political spectrum who just want to see the government function, does it make it inherently difficult to come up with a policy platform that's specific?
Well, again, right now, these policy prescriptions are being used essentially to set us up to combat each other. It's like, oh, you want, to address climate change or whatnot. You know who your enemy is? Those guys over there. When in reality, the system is not set up to solve our problems or reward leaders who prioritize solving our problems. So I think the coherent policy platform starts with actually reforming our structures. And if we reform our structures, then popular will lead us in a better direction policy-wise.
Tell me about what's happening on the ground throughout the states to try to bring people into the fold.
Yeah, we have tens of thousands of active volunteers, hundreds of thousands on our mailing list. We've raised millions of dollars. But the reality is that you have to be very hardcore to be showing up like on the regular for Forward Party county leadership meetings and the rest of it. And I'm thrilled to say that we have state leads now in 42 of the 50 states and volunteers in all 50 states. And so when I go to a place like Illinois or Utah or wherever, I'll meet with party leadership, and there are generally a couple of dozen very, very activated volunteers who are trying to get behind local candidates. And it's that nucleus that is going to enable us to grow as we qualify as a political party in more states and get behind candidates. Most humans, most Americans care about politics when they care about a candidate in a race they think matters to them. And our activists realize that there's actually something that comes before all of that, which I suspect your listeners do as well, which is that you need to actually reform the structures and incentives. And so the state leads and the volunteers in every state are helping lead the charge on those kinds of reforms to set the stage so that our candidates can compete.
Yeah, one of the things you've been a big proponent of is ranked choice voting, which I think is an interesting concept. I do have some hesitations about it. When you ran for mayor of New York City, it seemed confusing as hell to me, to be honest. It was like people teaming up with people, and I guess try to kind of walk people through the incentive of that system.
Sure. The single best thing I can say about ranked choice voting is that it'll enable you to vote for whomever you want, and no one can accuse you of wasting your vote or spoiling it for anyone. Because if you vote for the third party candidate and they don't win, then your vote will flow through to the major party candidate. And that is the cudgel that gets used against upstart new parties all the time. It's like, oh, you're going to screw it up. You're going to screw it up. It's like, well, if you adopt ranked choice voting, then no one can screw anything up. And you know what the response never is to that? It's like, oh, that's a great idea. We should do that. Because the reality is the two parties have no interest in genuine competition. They don't have any interest in having the will of the voters actually expressed in the ballot. So if you point out that ranked choice voting enables you to vote for whomever you want with no negative impact on, the major parties or whatnot, they still will fight you tooth and nail, because they know that if you had the ability to vote for whomever you want, they would lose power. And this is being borne out in Nevada right now, where ranked choice voting and nonpartisan open primaries, where anyone can vote for anyone, are on the ballot. And the Democrats in power in Nevada are fighting it tooth and nail. They already spent 7 figures trying to knock it out. And their rationale is not anything other than that it's going to be complicated and confusing, which, by the way, 85% of both Alaskans and New Yorkers said it was easy to use and I would want to do it again. And so when you have a chance to use it, Brandi, it ends up being very, very straightforward. My kids can rank 1, 2, 3 when I ask them what kind of food they want for dinner.
Well, I'm just a simple, lady originally from the Midwest. Numbers confuse me. I know you're a numbers guy. No, I'm sure it'll be easy. I just think, one of the things that kind of was hard to follow for me in the New York mayoral race was that sort of teaming up of candidates to try to sort of beat the ranked choice voting system. So is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well, first, let me say that in the New York primary context, it's not as interesting or useful because you're still within a party primary. Imagine if you could just have anyone of any party, and then if I trash you, then we both end up looking bad, and then the third person ends up looking better by comparison. Within the primary, it's mildly helpful, but not that interesting. It gets much more interesting if you include everyone of every party. So the New York primary is, in many ways, an imperfect example.
Yeah. Who's been more hostile toward your movement, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party?
No, I think it's typically been the Democratic Party for a couple of reasons. One is that Democrats think that all votes come from them. So they're like, oh, you're going to take our votes. You're going to take our votes. And then again, you're like, look, if you have ranked choice voting, no one takes anyone's votes. And then they're like, they still just don't have any rational counter to that. They just think like, you're going to get our votes. The other thing is that I used to be a Democrat. And so because of that, there's this sense that I'm going to take energy from their side of the aisle. So I think that's the general gist of it. The fact is, on the Republican side, there are a lot of more moderate Republicans that are totally not on board with Trumpism and Trump. And so when you say to them, hey, there might be another way, they're actually very, very receptive. I think more Democrats will be receptive if they lose the House or the Senate in November.
But absent, ranked choice voting becoming a reality, there is a chance you could be a spoiler. Have you ruled out 2024? Where are you at with that?
Well, it's one reason why we're so excited about a candidate and campaign like Evan McMullin, where he's running as an independent and it's just him versus, in that case, the Trump endorsed incumbent. So no spoiler effect to worry about. The fact is 70% of races of the 506,000 local races around the country are uncontested or uncompetitive. And so you don't really need to worry about the spoiler effect. Most of the people watching this or listening to this live in either a blue or red district where it's uncompetitive. The minority party really has no say. And so if you wind up trying to create a meaningful choice in, let's call it California, Democrats run everything, Republicans don't matter in most of the state. And so if you wind up running candidates against the Democrats, and that's a real choice, it'd be reverse in a rural area in a red state. So the spoiler effect only applies when you talk about essentially presidential races. Mm-hmm. And right now we're just completely focused on other races, especially since the 22 cycle is only a number of days away.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love the idea of mixing it up. Two-party isn't working for our country. But if we are talking about the presidential race in 2024, is that something that you're still actively considering?
Well, one of the things I would say is 58% of Americans aren't pumped about having either Donald Trump or Joe Biden in the rematch. Their combined age will be 159 in 2024. And you have to say it's a deeply irrational, dysfunctional system that's presenting those two guys as your number one and number two choices. So if there were a third option, and there's a group called No Labels that's investing 53 million in ballot access for a unity ticket or some third option. Tens of millions of Americans will seriously look at whatever that option is.
So you're not ruling it out, is what I take from that answer.
What I'm saying is that I think millions of Americans are going to be looking for alternatives if we wind up with a Trump Biden rematch.
And just for the record, how old are you now, Andrew?
I'm 47.
One of my favorite parts of the book, you'll probably hate to hear this because it was just a picture. I loved your high school picture.
Oh, thank you. You know, it wound up being a source of entertainment for the campaign as opposed to embarrassment. So
it was great. That way. I mean, it was like model quality. I'll put it up on screen for folks. I love that picture. So I want to ask you really quickly, I know we're running out of time. Tulsi Gabbard, what do you make of her very high profile departure from the Democratic Party?
No, I think it was inevitable, where despite the fact that she was a Democratic member of Congress, I mean, a lot of her sentiments and messages have been very, very, very contrary to the Democratic Party orthodoxy. And so I thought her leaving was just a matter of time.
Do you agree with some of the sentiments that she stated in her announcement about the Democratic Party?
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness.
Oh, I think that there are a lot of people that are frustrated with elements of the Democratic Party. A lot of it is a symptom of the fact that they're just these two parties, and they wind up not having to compete with anything but each other. And so it'll end up leading towards extremes because you have this ideological subgroup that's going to wind up being louder and more prominent. It's one reason why your audience and what Forward is trying to build, it's so important, is that there is this reasonable, silent, exhausted majority that is right now kind of silenced by the two-party system. So I'm sure there are a lot of people that feel similarly to what was expressed.
And is she the kind of politician who would be welcomed or even endorsed at some point by the Forward Party?
You know, the Forward Party is not Andrew Yang. The Forward Party is lots of different people. And so if everyone came together and said, look, let's get behind a certain candidate, then, you know, I'm sure we'd explore it.
Do you like her as a politician?
Tulsi and I always got along personally when we were on the trail. One of the things you have to know is that you're in the Union Hall in New Hampshire or the barbecue in Iowa, and you're just chilling with other candidates before and after you both speak. So Tulsi and I have been friendly for years, and her husband's a really great guy too. She was lucky enough to travel with her husband as her photographer.
Well, liking her as a person isn't the same as liking her as a politician. Do you like her brand of politics?
I certainly like the fact that she seems genuinely independent, and I think that her recent decision reflects that.
Well, let's end with this. I've already talked about your book on the show before, so certainly folks should read Forward if they haven't already. But if they want to actually join the Forward Party movement, how can they do that?
Go to forwardparty.com. We've got a chapter in your state. You can go meet some awesome people. I have a feeling that they're very much like you, fed up with the dysfunctional duopoly and the status quo. It's not going to end unless we actually present and build a common sense, positive, unifying alternative. So come help us build it at forwardparty.com.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I mean, this is our first time chatting, but it's nice to talk to someone who's politically inclined, who can speak like a real human being conversation. And so that's something I've always appreciated about your just speaking style and the way that you operate. And it's our 100th episode today. So I was like,
wow,
happy
100 episodes, Undivided.
Thank you.
Have we fixed everything yet? We'll have to do it over the next 100 episodes.
I know. So, all right, Andrew Yang, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Brandi.
So again, thank you to Andrew Yang for joining us for our 100th episode of Undivided. Again, if you haven't read his book already, I really enjoyed it. And I think that if you like this podcast, some of the things that he's talking about, you might not agree 100% with, where he wants to take the Forward Party, or you're concerned about the idea of vote splitting, or, being a spoiler in a presidential race, but I definitely think the book is worth a read and to check out what the Forward Party is up to. But like I said, it's one thing for, like me to talk about these issues and to express frustration with the two-party system. I think it's another thing to be doing the work on the ground, and there is little doubt that Andrew Yang is doing the work. If you've not become a subscriber to Undivided already, there are 2 ways you can do that, and it's as little as $5 a month. So if you think that what we're doing is important, if you find value in it, if you appreciate what we're doing to hold elected leaders accountable and to look at things through the lens of common sense, I would appreciate it if you'd become a paid subscriber to the show. That's how we're funded. This is a people-powered podcast, and you can do it for just $5 a month at patreon.com/undivided. That's patreon.com/undivided. Or you can become a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Undivided is presented by our founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.